then began to create problems for us. The other watershed was the Red Mosque raid in Islamabad, after which Zwahiri came on record and said that this will be avenged. And if you go back and Google that timeline, you will see that within 72 hours of the attack on Red Mosque, for 4 consecutive days, there were 2 attacks every day on military convoys or military installations. And this was also the time when Fazlullah and Swat, who had earlier been using the radio essentially for getting funding and influencing people and talking about Sharia law and the rest of it, began to talk about jihad against the state. And the entire discourse became violent from that point onwards. And they also then began to gather strength, and those that would not fall in line were mercilessly killed. So there was this, and this was, because there was the MMA government, which, and everyone knows, of course, about the MMA government. And this was the provincially administered tribal area, so they were looking the other way when these guys were gaining strength. The army was spread thin, and they didn't want to get into the area. The people were following this whole creed because they had no option. And I remember going and meeting with Fazlullah at that time before before Rai-Haq 1 actually, which was shortly before the emergency, 3rd November emergency. And I talked to the people also, and they were scared. And which is a classic way of first using persuasion to create a core group, and then using that core group and through coercion getting everyone in line. So what we now have is a situation where the army is physically in control of certain areas, but it has not been able to get to the other 2 phases of building and rehabilitating the people. Now, the dilemma there is, if I take the example of South Waziristan, the triangle that is being cleared, no civilian is there right now, which allows the army to actually monitor, because if there is any movement which is not army movement, then it is automatically a movement by the adversary. And it's easier for the army to take out the adversary when there's no one around. Because the idea on the other side is to remain tightly coupled with the local population and raise the cost of the operation in terms of collateral damage for the army. Which is exactly what they tried to do in Mingora, which is a populated city of about 3.5 lakh people or something, roughly around that population. But most of the people had begun to get out, so by the time the army actually operated, there were about 40,000 people left. So the dilemma is, if you get the IDPs back from South Waziristan, you put them there, how will you monitor the movement back of these people into the population and the operations that they will then conduct while remaining mixed up with the population? This is the kind of thing that the Americans have been facing. When there are any number of cases of their, while building up the local police and all that, there have been cases of the Taliban fighters actually going and getting the funds and the weapons from the Americans and using them at night in operations against the NATO ISAF troops. Because these are not people who wear uniform. You cannot identify them. It's all the same. So how do you identify your adversary or the combatant from someone who is a civilian? It's a big problem. But personally, the bigger problem is the debate that we have had in Pakistan. Why are we fighting this? And this whole question of whose war it is. And this is not just a dividing line between the liberals, and I use this term loosely, and the right wing. Even within the liberal enclave, there are differences. There are people who talk about the legitimacy of the state, the way it is configured, whether this is a state that has the legitimacy to do something like this, the nature of the foreign policy, the nature of relations with the United States, the way we have dealt with India over the last 6 decades, the civil-military imbalance that we've been, afflicted with for several reasons. So there are multiple dimensions of this debate. What it does is that it then, you have to begin with, you're dealing with a terrible problem, because the use of force per se in this kind of situation will not translate into utility of force. So that's a problem at the operational level already. But add to that problem this entire confusion about the nature of the state itself and what the relationship between state and society is, and what kind of mindset we have created over the last 40 years. Because that's the kind of mindset which then feeds into this whole idea of supra-state ideologies. And these supra-state ideologies is not just about some tribesmen saying, we don't care what the state does or what the state policy is. We believe that our Muslim brothers are being killed across the border, and therefore we will go and fight alongside them. Now this goes against the grain of the idea of the modern nation state. Whatever the nature of that modern state be, I'm not getting into that. Whether that state is authoritarian, it's democratic, or whatever. But the fact is that it focuses on its primacy. So when you have that kind of thing, then you have a problem. But simultaneously, it is not just about the tribesmen, because if a police guard decides that he's going to use his officially sanctioned weapon to kill someone who he has been assigned to protect, in that instant that he takes that decision, he is following an ideology which is suprastate, because he does not accept that what the state has assigned him to do is what he's supposed to do as a Muslim. So you got a problem there. Because the whole idea or the whole concept of the state then falls apart. The third problem here is that what is the unit of analysis that we're going to use? And that's the kind of problem that I face when I'm analyzing. There are non-state actors that are challenging the state. Then we have a state which is flawed in many ways. So where do I put my weight? Do I use the state as the unit of analysis? Do I think, what is the cost benefit here? If I am going to begin to attack the state at a particular point in time, when the state is also being attacked by other actors, whether in conceptual terms or whether in real physical terms, how will we then end up looking? Because I do not accept what the Taliban are doing. But there are any number of things about the state which I do not accept. For instance, civil-military imbalance being one of them. You know, the primacy of the army is something that I do not accept. But at the same time, this is the very force that I need in order to put down the non-state actors that are challenging the state. I also see empirically that the civilian principles have shown no capacity or will to do what they are required to do in the situation that we are. For instance, if you go to Malakand and if you talk to people, they will tell you that the provincial government has done zilch and zero, and that it is the army that they trust. So how do you analyze that situation and how do you write about it? There are any number of operations that have been conducted. Not a single civilian principal has gone to any of the operational areas. Not even for a photo op with the troops. Just to raise their morale and just to go there and tell them that, they're getting killed and injured because and that, the nation is thankful to them. No one has done that. So, you then have to begin to look at the whole idea of the civil-military imbalance in a different light. Which is not to say that the broader question has to be ignored, but that you have to nuance the entire thing about how you're going to deal with the problem at this point in time. And these are very tough questions. Emanating from this is yet another problem, which is that you have ideological camps. The right wing has an ideology that is all pervasive. They will look at everything from that prism. Ditto for the liberal enclave. Most people would not accept what I've said because they will say, and it's a very common thing, that whatever problems that we are facing today are all created by the Pakistan army. And therefore, you cannot support these guys. And if you support these guys, then you're probably embedded with it. And the whole idea of being embedded with them is also an idea which is put across without any nuance. How do you go into the operational areas? There are two sides in the conflict. You can either get the help of one side to go there or get the help of the other side to go there. And some of us have tried to do both. But there is no way that you can go into a conflict zone as an independent third party that decides that this is like a drawing room in which you can saunter in, and both the sides would know that you are the objective viewer, and therefore neither side is going to harm. That thing does not happen, believe me. Because you're likely to get killed by either one or the other side. So, all of this results in something that needs to be done, which is over a longer period the only way of dealing with the problem. And that is the strategy of dislocation. That you dislocate the insurgent and the terrorist from the context which strengthens it. But how do you do that? And here is the idea. The government, and this started with the Musharraf government, decided that they are going to empower the Bareilwis. so that the Deobandi Salafi Taliban can be as a counter-driving force. Because they are using a supra-state ideology to challenge the state. The man who killed Salman Taseer is a Bareli. And he used the same supra-state ideology to undermine the state. So you now have a problem here. You have a Barelvi mindset which on a different issue is prepared to do something supra-state, and you have the Deobandi mindset which is prepared to do something supra-state on the basis of a different ideology. And you have a minuscule minority of liberals, again the term is used loosely, which does not have a response to either that threat or this threat. Apart, of course, from being on Twitter and Facebook, there is no real response, no real strategy of how to deal with this. And additionally, as I said, there are conceptual fault lines on all these issues within the liberal enclave. So therefore, to think that they can actually act in any cohesive way and develop a coherent response to any of these threats I don't think that is likely to happen. So then you have, in the middle of all this, you have the army, which for whatever reason is the only organized, disciplined force which has largely remained intact